Is Legendary Sigurd still good? What even determines a good Legendary hero? Is it a player phase killer or a defensive wall? Let's push past the hype and look at the actual numbers. A Legendary unit's most common threats are other Legendaries, so that's the matchups we're going to measure each of these against. They're the best way to measure their combat effectiveness because you'll see them so many times. Each unit is given an Omni +6 in the simulation, and they're awarded 1 point for a win, -1 for a loss, and 0 for a draw. We'll do that for both the player and the enemy phase. At the end, we'll mix in arena scoring and support capabilities. I'm also throwing Duo Crom in because he's so common that he's become an honorary Legendary. But before we begin, let me know in the comments who your go-to Legendary is. Let's get started with our latest and greatest. Summoners, this is a tough one to start off with. On paper, this is a flying tank. Slaying, Omni debuff, damage reduction, dual phase guaranteed follow-up, a wary effect, and warp bubble. That's a lot, but we've seen these laundry lists before. A 28 ties her for 9th place in the player phase. It's not bad, but this unit sacrifices some oomph to be mixed phase, and you guys know how I feel about mixed phase. Still, if you look in season, she cleans house. The only inconclusive is Lyn. How many Legendary Lyns do you run into in the Coliseum? But the selling point of this unit is supposed to be the enemy phase, and what the heck, a -5? That's smart. I mean, she ranks 8th, but still, this is not great. You generally expect better from a dragon. I mean, Legendary Fae does better. The in-season matchups get worse. The upside is she does win versus Duo Crom, and that's not a small thing. Still, Byleth, Micaiah, Lucina, Gunnthra, Lyn, and Myrrh all demolish her. And this is a good segue to talk about the new distant counter seal and how it's actually bad. I didn't believe it either, but the fact is, the new DC skill comes with more stats and seals have become really good. For instance, if you put Distant Storm and Attackera's form on this unit, her score jumps to a +2. That includes 4 more wins, and that is not a small deal. The problem is, this is the highest scoring Legendary in the game right now. I guess it's worth sacrificing a few points for that DC seal. So she scores fantastically, she's an absolute menace in summoner duels, and if you make her a melee specialist, you can let the wave of Aether Rays units smash up against her without breaking a sweat. Wait, what's that I hear? The one Harmonic Roy fan is saying he demolishes her? I'll give that to you, but let's talk about a more contentious unit. I feel like Legendary female Byleth gets a lot of flack for being worse than her male counterpart. Combat-wise, they actually do about the same, and Byleth has carved out a niche for herself. In terms of player phase, a 28 will tie her with Myrrh. That puts her in 9th place. She basically kills everyone aside from Legendary Hector and dies to Eitri, Sita, and Corrin. That is a pretty stellar performance considering many complain about her being an inferior version of Legendary male Byleth. In terms of her enemy phase performance, Byleth isn't the best and sits at a -15, but the combination of her high speed, null follow-up, and prevention of special acceleration allows her to be middle of the pack and tie for 15th place with male Byleth. Ironic, I know. Still, being able to win against Duo Crom and Micaiah definitely gives Byleth a couple of points in her favor. Those two can be hard to tank even in the best conditions. The most unique thing about female Byleth, and what I would say is her advantage over her male counterpart, is the unique support she brings, namely giving tempo to herself and allies within 2 spaces. Legendary male Byleth was notable when he was released for the NFU support he could bring, but with the addition of Fallen Lilith, Infantry NFU, and Infantry Speed Tactic, that support has become a little less unique. Actually, a lot less unique. Even though we have tempo skills now, they are still very rare. The tempo that Byleth gives can make her an incredible pick for either Aether Raids or Summoner Duels. Even if she is not the best nuker in the world, she can help ensure your best nukes do their job well, and trigger those specials that allow them to deal massive damage. So is this unit better than Legendary male Byleth? It depends on if you need tempo or no follow-up. She's certainly not in his shadow though. Legendary Micaiah is an amazing unit. Armor and cavalry effectiveness, a guaranteed follow-up, desperation with an HP condition, harsh command plus and sacrifice. damage reduction, and the ability to absolutely level things with that stat line. Micaiah's player phase is simply the best. She is not just the best player phase win legendary, this is the highest player phase score available of all legendaries. She only loses to legendary female Byleth. Chances are if you use Micaiah in arena, she is going to kill whoever stands in her way. Glass cannons are super proficient when they initiate, but have a hard time taking hits. Looking at that -25, Micaiah fits this description pretty well. She ranks 26th of 37. The reality is that she was not meant to tank things. Regardless of what game mode you're using Micaiah, she is one huge nuke capable of obliterating things. This means both in the AR offense and defense, she functions really well in demolishing things. In Summoner duels, she has a similar role as an AR, tank busting and nuking. You can absolutely trust her ability to kill most things in the field. I'm going to keep this one short because this is not a unit that requires a lot of thought, but this next unit is one of the most divisive units in all of FE. Legendary Sigurd is the consensus best investment in win season, and I wanted to dig into the numbers to see if that was actually true. There's a lot to like here between his PRF, Crusader's Ward, and Holy Knight Aura, but score-wise, he's hanging near the middle of the pack when it comes to player phase, tied for 15th. While that may not seem that impressive, a score of 21 is solid enough for him to be relevant. Additionally, his utility and global buffs from Holy Knight Aura can usually help offset some offensive matchups. Since we're already talking about matchups, let's look at the specifics. While he might not beat every legendary out there, the ones he does handle are important as they are some of the more widely used legendaries out there. In particular, two of the surprises were Dimitri and Duochrome. Enemy faces a bit of a mixed bag, but still impressive all things considered. That -14 puts him firmly in the middle of the pack once again. The thing to keep in mind is that Sigurd is primarily a player phase unit. Whenever I see a design split resources, it just means they'll be worse at their specialty. Still, there are some key matchups that the Crusader's Ward helps with. Outside of Arena, Sigurd's main appeal is in Aether Raid's defense. Despite the advent of Stall Ploy and other silver bullet effects, Sigurd can still provide the necessary force that your cav line needs to make them go off. He's also useful in Summoner duels, although his role here is somewhat similar to his role in Arena. He takes a bit of building around, but Sigurd can absolutely make a strong addition to the right teams if given a chance. Is this unit usable? Certainly. It's just amazing that a year after his release, he just doesn't hold up in combat as well as I would have expected. But now we enter a dark period in win season. Oh, Corrin. IS is mean sometimes. Do you remember when Legendary Corrin dropped and everyone was talking about how we might be finally getting a good dragon? There was so much hype around this unit, but the meta changes quickly, and it's not a happy place for an enemy phase infantry unit. For the player phase, she scores a whopping 0. That's the 32nd worst score. That's abysmal and put her next to Legendary Ike. Unfortunately, it's worse when you look at in season. She only beats Hrid and Myrrh. Surely her enemy phase is better, right? This is just painful. A -8 hurts for a unit that is just not that old and is designed for this role. She ties for 9th with Fjorm. The silver lining is she does beat Duochrome. That's not bad for a unit that you'll see on almost every arena team for at least the next 6 months. As far as uses, if we're not considering scoring at all, she's fantastic in AR. For the bare feet lovers among you, you might have to wait for a refine to truly get redemption. Eliwood is really good for one thing, and we all know what that is. Giving massive buffs to whoever has the highest attack on his team. He's pretty good at his job too, since he can give these buffs from any distance and without using his action. That said, how does he do outside of being a support unit? With a grand score of 3, Eliwood takes his place as the 30th overall scoring legendary unit in the player phase. I won't beat around the bush here. Summoners, this isn't good. He's not the worst of his season when it comes to player phase combat, but he loses nearly as many matchups as he wins. In season, at least he beats Micaiah, Lyn, and Gunnthra. That's a pretty low bar though. I'm kind of scared to turn the page. In the enemy phase, with a score of -31, Eliwood is in a 4-way tie for 32nd place. That's bad. That means there's only a couple of legendaries who do worse than him. You know what's really key here? Optimism. Optimism is key. In season, Eliwood does not lose to legendary Lyn. He beats Seliph, for whatever that's worth. Yes, summoners, I'm aware how bad this is, but it's okay. He's slated for his refine at some point in the very near future, and like we said at the outset, this is not a combat unit. You can build him for combat and he will sometimes kill things, but the real value he brings to the table is how he enables entire strategies revolving around building raid bosses. That extends to any mode you want. Aether raids, summoner duels, the Colosseum, and he makes some wicked PvE highlight reels. But we need to talk about the biggest surprise in this whole season. How did a unit that a few months ago was a complete joke turn into a complete monster? Seriously, I've been soloed by Hrid in AR defense. The stat swing he gains from his weapon is insane. Hrid's amazing refine has completely revitalized this unit. Just look at his player face matchups. The ability to turn enemy buffs into greater debuffs vaults Hrid to a very respectable 9th place in the player phase with 28 points. That's not bad for a unit you were always happy to see in Arena just a year ago. The fact that he beats blue threats such as Dimitri, Tiki, and Crom shows just how far he's come. Just imagine how amazing he'd be with an actual A skill. In season, he'll have no problem cutting through other win heroes. The only one who gives him trouble is legendary Myrrh. But what do you do when you've got a non-combat A skill against the newest win legendary? As for enemy phase, he's still decent, but definitely a little less intimidating when compared to his player phase. His results give him a score of -3, which places him as 9th best for enemy phase. And he's actually the best performing win legendary. In a season with Corrin and Myrrh, this is the best enemy phase unit, and he's running a dual skill. Overall, he still performs very well in Colosseum and Aether raids, so you should have a lot of fun crushing other units with him. If you've got an invested one, feel free to plop him in front of an AR defense with a bit of support and watch him go to work. Just don't try to tank another Hrid with him. But it's time for a fan favorite. Legendary Lucina got such an interesting refine and remix. Using Future Vision 2, she inflicts debuffs, gives an auto follow-up, and plays nicely into her Pelagian effect. Did I mention it gives her another action? But let's not sugarcoat this. Her player phase results prove Lucina is aggressively medium. A total of 14 points leaves her tied for 20th overall, so middle of the pack. It makes sense when you consider what she really brings to the table, that being a scoring movement assist skill. In season, she does surprisingly okay. She struggles to deal with the damage reduction from Micaiah, Sigurd, and Corrin, and Hrid is just surprisingly bulky, but otherwise she is able to handle the rest of the in-season matchups. In the enemy phases where Lucina really starts to show her age, with the -24. That lands her with a two-way tie for, funnily enough, 24th place among all legendaries. She even loses to legendary Celica, for goodness sake. Her in-season matchups are not good. She survives the 2 worst in-season legendaries on player phase, but otherwise she loses in every matchup. What I will say is you can't express the value of a preference assist, and we'll talk about this more later, but it's valuable in every mode and works like a slightly worse refresher. It makes Lucina a decent combat unit and a pseudo-dancer. She's especially good in AR where her stats can be adjusted through the wonder of mythic blessings. I've talked to Lucina users, they're very happy with their girl. The fans of this next unit are less than excited though. Legendary Lyn is a player phase unit through and through. Her speed-based true damage and her personal version of impenetrable dark on her bow is fantastic, but the fact that she needs a dual skill in her A slot makes her miss her PRF skill, which is basically wind sweep and some buffs. That's a huge hit, and the player phase in 11 isn't bad. It's the 23rd worst score of all legendaries. She's able to clutch out wins against a good amount of current gen legendaries, and even on her own season, she can still deal with a good portion of threats on her player phase, but it's just not enough. Why didn't IS give her a dual clause in her preference A skill? If we take a look at her enemy phase results, things go downhill even faster. She can't win any in-season matchups and is only able to stalemate 2 win legendaries. She ranks as the 21st best enemy phase. If you consider Legendary Lyn outside of Coliseum, her performance improves dramatically since she can use her preference A skill. On ARD, she can be used as a true damage nuke since she already has Wind Sweep and can outspeed most Far Saviors. Did I mention that she does decently versus Brave Hector? Moving on, we've got Hrid's sister, Gunnthra. Like her brother, Gunnthra's Weapon Refine has given new life to her combat and supportive abilities. Have you ever noticed one of your units doing way less damage than normal and Brave Micaiah is not on the screen? Well, Gunthra's debuffs are probably the culprit. Her hybrid Plegian and Blade Tome weapon make her a solid threat in the player phase. Like Hrid, she suffers a bit for being forced to run a dual skill in her A slot, but her strong matchups against most other legendaries give her a player phase score of 14, which is good enough for the 20th best player phase score. Notably, she beats a lot of blue tanks such as Legendary Myrrh, Fae, and Tiki. Just don't attack Legendary Micaiah with her. Or Seliph. Dual skills, right? It's worth noting if you stack debuffs, her matchups get a lot better, but we're really doing one-on-one matchups here. In the enemy phase, please don't try to tank with her. She already sacrificed herself once for her team. Does she really need to do it again? But seriously, unless you're facing a Legendary Azura or a massively debuffed foe, don't tank with Gunnthra. She loses to basically every legendary out there, which gives her a score of -33, the absolute lowest enemy phase score of any legendary. But don't despair, despite her shortcomings as a tank, Gunnthra does an excellent job as a support unit, debuffing multiple foes at once just by existing. Definitely don't underestimate her as an enemy phase unit in Aether raids. I have learned that the hard way. So let's take a step back and look at the big picture. In the player phase, we have one truly elite unit in Micaiah, but Myrrh, Byleth, and Hrid are solidly S tier and very good. A tier has a lonely Sigurd, and he's showing his age. Lucina, Gunnthra, and Lyn are solid units that can function situationally and all win key matchups. Then there's Eliwood and Corrin. C tier isn't a fun place to be. In the enemy phase, it's interesting, no one claims S tier, and this is a season with 2 units designed to be enemy phase. I'm still wrapping my head around the fact that Hrid takes top spot in win season here in A tier. He doesn't even have DC. Myrrh and Corrin aren't far behind him though. B tier has some interesting units in Sigurd, Byleth, and Lyn. They win some key matchups. Then there's the breathe on me and I collapse tier. Lucina, Micaiah, Eliwood, and Gunnthra should stay far away from the action. But it's time to look at some special skills. This is where win season really shines, and you all need to watch this. IS likes to try out new effects on this season, so pay attention to the next win legendary. Just look at this lineup. Extra movement, AoE guard, free bonus doubler, a warp inhibitor, a pseudo refresher, a mega debuffer, and a tempo drive. No other season has this. It's also a test bed for the statement, supportive units age best. And I want to make something clear. They don't. Unique and powerful units age the best, period. But I will say supportive power creep is slower than offensive power creep, just not by much. As far as range unit goes, I've said it before, but they just add another dimension to the Coliseum. Same thing with flying. These units all add something extra, and it makes the season's lack of power tolerable. All right, let's get the boring stuff out of the way. The DC seal has added something special for Myrrh and Corrin. Specifically, it makes Corrin's situation just a bit more tolerable, but Myrrh is a whole generation ahead scoring-wise. That's likely to change as they release more 300 SP seals, but it makes her very appealing. Byleth, Micaiah, and Sigurd are all at a very usable 758. Everyone else is in the 754 basement. You can use these units, but they definitely require more merges from your bonus unit for scoring. It's doable, but the Coliseum is just so competitive. Let's look at the big tier list now. This one was hard, but we've seen the landscape of supportive units change a ton recently as duo skills become more and more powerful and inheritable skills get more unique. If you're starting from scratch, I think Micaiah and Myrrh are the way to go. Think about the longevity of OG Micaiah in this game. Her legendary art just puts out even more damage. She's a year old and she's still at the top of the food chain. Myrrh would be lower on this list if she didn't have a viable player phase, but she does. She's mixed phase, which terrifies me, but the sky-high scoring just can't be beat. For now. Next, we have the really unique powerhouses. Extra movement is becoming more and more commonplace, but Sigurd is still unique in how he gives it to other units. But I'll be honest, they screwed up with Crusader's Ward. I cannot say this enough. Mixed phase units age really quickly. If the B skill had a player phase focus or just preference trace, he'd be so much better off. I'm hoping one of the new 300 SP inheritable B skills fit him better, but this is a unit that is trending down, and it's not a slow descent. Byleth is still really good in a quality investment. Hrid is my choice if you're on a budget. I still cannot believe how good his Refine and Remix is. Eliwood and Lucina are both good units in their own rights and bring some really fun things to the table. Corrin, Gunnthra, and Lyn, if you're a fan, I get it. Everyone else, steer clear. I wanted to add one more thing about win season. The thing that makes this so subjective is the fact that supportive skills only help certain playstyles. Hrid, for instance, is amazing at helping hit and run teams in AR. Eliwood is fantastic for building raid bosses and summoner duels. Gunnthra can absolutely go off on a cav line. Different players are going to value these things higher or lower. If your rating is different than mine, it's understandable, especially for these kinds of units. Anyway, huge thanks to John, Ilya, Mori, FJ, and Riven for helping with the script. It's been an extra long couple of weeks, and these folks really bailed me out. Summoners, take care and schedule an appointment with your FEHologist real soon.